Top Accurate Global News Update. I am Abiodun Mohammed. The first big ship carrying grain from a Ukrainian Black Sea port has set sail since Moscow quit a deal in July to allow exports, the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister said on Friday, part of Kyiv's campaign to break Russia's de facto blockade. The Ariat, quote, left the port Chornomorsk after loading 17,600 metric tons of Ukrainian wheat for Egypt, Alexander Kubrakov said on the X social media app, formerly Twitter. It was the second of two bulk carriers to leave the port this week using what Kyiv calls a new temporary humanitarian corridor. The first, the much smaller Resilient Africa, left on Tuesday, testing the route with a cargo of just 3,000 tons. After invading Ukraine last year, Moscow closed off the Black Sea port from one of the world's biggest suppliers of grain in what Kyiv and its western backers called an attempt to use global food supplies as blackmail. Moscow said the port could bring in weapons. From July 2022, the ports were reopened under the UN-backed grain deal, allowing Russia to inspect ships for arms. But Moscow quit a year later and reimposed the blockade, saying its demands for better terms for its own food and fertilizer exports were being ignored. Ukraine last month announced a humanitarian corridor in the Black Sea, initially using it to release ships that do not carry grain and were not covered by the grain deal, which had been trapped in its port for more than a year. 5 vessels have left so far using the corridor, which hugs the Romanian and Bulgarian coasts. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Thursday called on India to cooperate with an investigation into the murder of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia and said Canada would not release its evidence. Trudeau said on Monday that Ottawa had credible allegations linking Indian government agents to the murder of Adip Singh Nijjar in June, prompting an angry reaction from New Delhi. Nijjar, aged 45, was a Canadian citizen. The Canadian government has amassed both human and signals intelligence in a month-long investigation into the Sikh separatist leader's murder. CBC News separately reported on Thursday, citing sources, traditional Canadian allies have so far taken a relatively cautious approach to the matter. Political analysts said this was partly because the United States and other major players see India as a counterweight to the growing influence of China. The CBC report said, citing Canadian sources, that no Indian official, when pressed behind closed doors, has denied the allegation that there is evidence suggesting Indian government involvement in Nijjar's death. India's Ministry of External Affairs did not immediately respond to pressmen's request for comment on the CBC report. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made his second visit to Washington, D.C. since Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of his country. But unlike in his first trip to the United States Capitol, Zelensky faced a Congress less inclined to back the war effort with large aid packages, despite pledges from top Democrats to stand behind Ukraine. In brief public remarks before the White House cabinet on Thursday, Zelensky struck a note of gratitude, calling his negotiations in Washington, quote, productive and strong. He also highlighted new military assistance worth $128 million announced by US President Joe Biden on Thursday. Biden, a Democrat, used his presidential drawdown authority to authorize the aid, as further funds for Ukraine proved to be a sticking point in the US Congress. The cabinet meeting culminates a whirlwind charm offensive from the Ukrainian president, who traveled to New York earlier this week to rally support among world leaders at the United Nations. Manila is exploring legal options against China over its alleged destruction of coral reefs within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone (EEZ) in the disputed South China Sea. Manila has accused Beijing of causing environmental damage at Iroquois Reef in the Spratly Islands and is currently assessing the extent of the damage. China accuses the Philippines of trying to, quote, create political drama. Manila and Beijing have clashed increasingly this year over the South China Sea, with Manila accusing the Chinese Coast Guard of, quote, dangerous maneuvers around Second Thomas Shoal, known as Ayungin Shoal, in the Philippines. China claims almost the entire South China Sea under its controversial 9-dash line and has been building artificial islands on rocky outcrops and islets, some of which have been turned into military outposts. It has also deployed its Coast Guard, fishing fleet, and maritime militia to the disputed waters, which are also claimed, all or in part, by the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Hydropower generation in Asia has plunged at the fastest rate in decades amid sharp declines in China and India, data shows, forcing power regulators battling volatile electricity demand and erratic weather to rely more on fossil fuels. The two countries, which account for about 3/4 of Asia's power generation and most of its emissions, are also to a lesser extent using renewables to make up for the hydropower shortfall and address rising electricity use. Major Asian economies have faced power shortages in recent years due to extreme weather conditions, including intense heat and lower rainfall over large swaths of northern China and Vietnam, as well as in India's east and the north. Higher use of polluting fuels such as coal to meet electricity demand spikes and supply shortages underscore the challenges of lowering emissions. Asia's hydropower output fell 70.9% during the 7 months through July, data from energy think tank Ember showed, while fossil fuel-fired power rose 4.5%. China's hydroelectricity generation during the 8 months ended August declined at the sharpest rate since at least 1989, falling 15.9%. An analysis of National Bureau of Statistics data showed. That is the size of top accurate global news update. You can follow us on our social media platforms as displayed on your screen. Happy weekend!